I've been an addiction consultant now for about 13 years. So I tend to treat people in the community. I treat people in hospitals. I treat people in inpatient detox. I treat people in prisons. And sadly, I also treat them on their deathbeds. So I've got a range of experience in different settings and with different drugs. Now, addictions in the workplace is a huge elephant in the room, and it's a big elephant to get through in 20 minutes. So I'm going to have to skim through some of the slides. But what I will also warn you about is I'm too vain to wear varifocals. My handwriting is very bad, so I might have to peer at my paper. What I'm going to cover basically today is what's an addiction, what are the common drugs of abuse and misuse, what are the behavioral addictions. One of my MBA dissertation was on online shopping addiction. It's a huge hidden problem. What the cost of the workplace is, how do you identify addictions in the workplace, and lastly, finding help, which all of you in HR know is not the easiest thing in the world. So when anyone thinks of an addict, this is what they think. Well, in their head, this is what they've got. This is the picture, somebody who's trying to shove everything they can into every orifice they've got as fast as it will go. Yeah? But however, it does span the range. But when you look at addictions, there are certain key characteristics that span any chemical substance addiction. And these are the kind of things we look for. The first thing is craving. So it's not craving where you're craving chocolate or a piece of cake. It's of an entirely different scale. You don't have it. That's all you're thinking about. You can't actually not satisfy that craving. It does get that difficult. The second one is a loss of control. So most people, when they think of addictions, they think, well, they did it to themselves. They should have known better. But actually, the reality with addictions is, when people first start using drugs, you're right, there's that degree of control over their actions. But as the drug use progresses, actually, the feedback inhibitory loop vanishes. So it becomes more of an automatic act and less of something that people have actually volitional control over. The next one is withdrawal. So when you stop using the drugs, if you're dependent on substances like diazepam or alcohol, you're using lots of them, you can actually die. If you stop using other drugs, you can feel so physically uncomfortable that only using the drug will relieve those symptoms of discomfort. And actually, that's what seems to drive people in addictions continuing to use. Because the initial pleasure, most people never ever recreate. It is then to stave off the withdrawal symptoms that people continue to use drugs. There's tolerance, where you need to use more and more of the drug to get the same effect or to keep the withdrawals at bay. There's salience, where the drug use or the alcohol use completely takes over somebody's purpose in life. So it becomes a lifestyle and it becomes a career choice. So for a heroin addict, you think, well, most people think, they don't actually have anything to do. All they do is spend time every day using drugs. The reality is most of them wake up at 7 o'clock worrying about where they're going to get their drugs. Some of them actually carefully plan their days. To use, say, an average 60-pound worth of heroin a day, they actually have to shoplift for about 300 pounds so they can get that 60. And then there's a social circle around their drug use. They're stealing in groups, they're selling in groups, they're again using in groups. There's this whole lifestyle and career that they build up. It's actually a very organized thing. And when you take that away, it can leave people grieving for that addiction lifestyle. They continue to use despite harms. There's a narrowing of repertory. So what happens then is, over time, you start wanting the biggest bang for your buck. So if you're drinking, say, Johnny Walker, you go down to the cheapest cider you can get. So you're trying to just get as much of the substance as you can. And the last one is, once you stop, unfortunately, if you use a substance again, you kickstart a whole separate brain mechanism that hooks you back into the addiction very, very quickly. And very quickly again, do you get addicted to the substance at the levels that you were initially addicted to. So these are the behavioral addictions. This is a chap being dragged off to treatment with his computer. There are several actually internet addiction treatment facilities across the Far East now. But again, with behavioral addictions, the basis is any activity that's stimulating, people can get addicted to. What happens is when a habit becomes an obligation, you've got an addiction. You've got several offline addictions. You've got the gambling, the gaming, the sex, exercise, food. And if you then throw in the internet, you've got a potentially more dangerous and darker dimension. There's another concept that some of you may have heard of is something called an addictive personality. Anyone heard of that term? Yeah? Sadly, it doesn't actually exist. It's a bit of a fallacy because what people have is not an addictive personality. What they have is poor coping mechanisms. So every time they feel terrible about themselves, or they've got low self-esteem, or they're feeling anxious, they can't cope with this feeling. So they go from drug to drug to drug, or to behavior to disordered behavior, trying frantically to fix themselves and to feel normal again. So that's at the basis of that addictive personality. But again, with the behavioral addiction, you've got the salience, mood modification. What you're doing that activity for is to change the way you feel in a negative way. You've got withdrawal symptoms again, and conflict and relapse. The people who engage in these behaviors are forever conflicted with themselves, right? They know what they're doing has a negative impact, but they do it anyway because there's nothing else that they know of that will fill that void or to make them normal. And relapse again is another, you give up one behavior, either you go back to that behavior or you find something else. So people who give up alcohol will go to gambling, or people who give up gambling go to alcohol. And alcohol, they go to heroin or vice versa. Common drugs of abuse, that's heroin, LSD, cocaine. Those are drugs called nootropics. They are cognitive enhancers. That's methylphenidate, crystal meth, cannabis, and that's magic mushrooms, like it says. It's very hard to look at a mushroom and figure out which one's the magic ones. Basically, people go after the different drugs based on their biochemistry, their biology, what their gene types actually say. There are certain people who use stimulant drugs and feel really anxious and never use it again. There are other people who have chronically low levels of neurotransmitters in their brain. They use these stimulants and they think, oh my goodness, I suddenly feel normal again. It's been years since I felt this way, and then they hooked onto those kind of drugs. But any stimulant, basically what they do is there's feeling of well-being, strength, confidence, energy. It kind of deals with your tiredness, it takes away your sleep. And if you're drinking heavily, it's a great way to cure a hangover or to put the hangover at rest. Depressants have nothing to do with depression. What they do, though, is they take away anxiety and they put people to sleep so they don't have to deal with their realities. Hallucinogens, what they do, they mess with your brain. So you start seeing things that other people aren't seeing, you're hearing things other people aren't hearing, or sometimes your brain confuses stimuli. So what happens is you start tasting sound. And NPS and nootropics, is that something you've come across yet? No? Well, NPS is what they call plant food or legal highs. It's a big problem in the city. It's called plant food because it's not sold for human consumption. It's actually sold as for plants, where people will use it. And it's a clever way of using drugs that are designed to act like illicit drugs, but you can't test for them. So that's why it's a problem. It's very popular in the prison. Spice, if you've heard of spice, that's NPS. And it's a very difficult one for us in the prison because we have several seizures every week that we can't control because of the spice. You can generally buy them in head shops. Nootropics are what you call cognitive enhancers. So people will use them to make them function better. Again, very hard to test for in urine. So these are drugs with supposedly very popular with students and in the city because they make you supposedly again think sharper, think smarter, keep you awake. But they're all based on ADHD-like treatments, or somebody's taken xanthine from coffee and mutated the molecule to make you super alert. So there are all kinds of molecules that go in there. Again, it's really easy to buy on the internet despite the ban. So this is the prevalence. It's more common than, most of you know how common it is. 34% of 16 to 15-year-olds, 59-year-olds have used it in a lifetime, 10% to 12% the last year. Cannabis is still the most popular drug, followed by cocaine and ecstasy. NPS is on the rise. There are 200,000 people on opiate for heroin treatment across the UK. And apart from that, there's another 200,000 people who are heavily dependent on heroin or opiate-like substances. 5% of the population are dependent on alcohol. When I say dependent, medically dependent. If they stopped, it would seriously harm them at any one time in the UK. Again, if you then add the harmful drinking on top of that, that's probably another 10%. 20% of people smoke. Obesity is on the rise. We have 500,000 people on benzo prescriptions to reduce anxiety. And then you have the behavioral addictions. No one really knows what the hell's going on, but we think it's about 5 to 6% of the population at any one time. From this, you can only infer that as a species, God left self-control out of our DNA. But if you look at stats that are closer home, unfortunately, there are no real stats for the City of London. But New York, which is the closest I could find, 7% of employees in the finance and insurance business had used illicit drugs in the past month. Us as an older generation, I mean over 40, are actually drinking more than our children. Only 50% of 16 to 24-year-olds had drunk in the past week, as compared to ours, which is more than, I think, about 70% had drunk in the past week. The richer you are, the more likely you are to have drunk in the past week. And also, if you work in finance, legal, accounting, you're more likely to have drunk in the past week as well. So this is where education and being rich doesn't help. If you look at the numbers for gambling, we've got 450,000 people who are actively gambling and have a problem with gambling in the UK. We also think there are another 300,000 people with hidden addictions, with the hidden gambling addictions. Against this 750,000 people with a problem gambling, anyone want to guess how much treatment we have on the NHS for it? Any guesses how many clinics? We have almost one, and that's due to shut fairly soon. They really struggle for funding. It's one of the fastest growing addictions and one of the biggest causes of custodial sentences at the minute. In the financial, accounting, legal sectors, sadly, more than a third of people who had gambling problems or spent any money gambling didn't want their co-workers to find out. And if you want to hide something, that means there's already a problem there. What's the cost to the economy? It's very hard to put a direct cost because you're looking at something that spans death, morbidity, and then all kinds of behaviors in the workplace. And different countries use different methodologies. But if you look at deaths, there are about 8,500 deaths in the UK for alcohol, 2,000 plus for drugs, 100,000 that can be directly attributed to smoking. Smoking itself costs the economy brings the economy about 9.5 billion in revenue. The government very generously spends about 100 million of that in stop smoking clinics. The alcohol cost of the economy we've already talked about. It's close to 21 billion. 7.3 billion of that is due to lost productivity. You've got the Norwich Union statistics recently where they showed that 1 in 10 people across companies that they'd surveyed were turning up regularly drunk or with a hangover to work at least once a month. 15% reported being drunk at work in the last 2 weeks, and 77% of the employees they surveyed identified alcohol as a major concern for them. There's very little data on the cost of illicit drug use, unfortunately, but we think it's about 10 billion in lost productivity and revenue. The bottom line is there are too many people, there's too little sources of help, and the other thing that complicates the issue in terms of cost is that most people with addiction don't just have an addiction. They also have comorbidities. There's mental health, there's psychiatric health, there's physical health, and all that kicks in and making it a very toxic cocktail. Why else should employers care? There's a reputational cost, there's a theft cost, the reputational cost. You have an employee who's a problem if they turn up to work, and the employee is a problem if they aren't at work. If they aren't at work, you've got to cover. And then you have to manage your sickness and absence, and most HR people find that quite difficult. If they are at work, they make mistakes. They stress their employees out. When they turn in and out, they're quite erratic. They stress their co-workers out, and then there's a lot of turnover in the business. So what I wanted to do is play you an audio clip from one of my recent patients. He's a City of London finance worker. Would you mind playing the clip, please?
Hello there, I'm a 42-year-old man. I've been working in the city for the last 20 plus years, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about how I've been involved with alcohol and cocaine and how it's escalated to the point whereby I've ended up in rehab. So my story goes as follows. When I was a very young lad, 18 years old, I started working within a money brokers, which is a great job, a hard job to get into. At the time, as a trainee, you are helped by your peers quite considerably, and they tend to look after you. And by look after you, I mean if you're going out to the pub, they'll buy your drinks for you, they'll earn a lot more money, and as a trainee, you're not earning a lot at all. As well as buying your alcohol, they'll also give you cocaine. That's not because they're selling it to you or encouraging you to use it. It's just a norm in terms of they use coke, they drink, I work with them, I'll be using coke, I'll be drinking as well. So that was the first introduction to alcohol and cocaine. It became the norm, so whenever the more senior people would go out and work with their clients, and often the clients would be on the cocaine as well, and the reason why they did this was to try and secure business. I'd be out with them as well, and also be partaking in the drinking and the taking of cocaine. And like I say, the reason why we was doing this was basically to win business from our clients. So, for example, we'd go out one night, we'd spend an extortionate amount of money, we're probably talking £2,000 in a night, and the very next day you go into work and the client you'd be working with would then give you a trade, and that trade would probably be worth something like £20,000 to £30,000. So if you think in terms of the level of investments, for £2,000 you've made obviously 28 grand on a night out. I did this for several years and it was a norm. Then I was made redundant, and I decided that this really wasn't the career for me because it was too cocaine and alcohol orientated. My dad was an alcoholic. My dad's dad was an alcoholic, so it was a route I was keen not to go down. So I then chose to move into recruitment, which is a very similar business, very client orientated, and kind of followed the same path. So what we do is we take our clients out, we spend an extortionate amount of money again, and we'd be drinking lots and lots of alcohol, generally staying in a hotel, so we'd be up to 3 o'clock in the morning, drinking, taking cocaine, and then with a view to going back to work the next morning at 8 o'clock. The more and more we started taking cocaine and drinking, the worse we tended to feel the next day. So we hit upon this brilliant idea of having a drink in the morning, which would then kind of level us out, if you like. So after a period of doing this over a considerable amount of time, it got to the stage whereby we needed more and more alcohol to help us get through the day. So my typical day would be I'd get on the train at a time whereby I could walk past my local shop and buy a couple of small bottles of wine, which I would drink in the morning. That would stop the shakes. I'd have another couple of small bottles of wine which I would take with me and have in my locker at work. During the course of the day, I would then drink one of those as and when needed, and then the other one a little bit later. I'd make whatever excuse I could to get out of the office early, to go to lunch. So my typical trick was to say, I'm going to lunch at 11 o'clock instead of 12. Rather than coming back at 12, I'd come back at 1. So I'd have a 2-hour lunch, and within those 2 hours I could get 4 pints in. So that'd be 4 pints, probably 4 little mini bottles of wine. And then I'd look for any excuse during the course of the day to either sneak out and do a run to the pub. Now my pub's literally 3 minutes away from my office, so I'd run down there very quickly, drink a pint within a minute, and then run back to the office, and that'd be enough to keep me going for a little bit longer. And then whatever excuse I could use to get out of the office to go and have another drink, I would. And also other kind of things we did as a devious nature of what we are is we'd be taking cocaine in the office as well. And an example of this is back in the day when I was a money broker, We'd been out the night before. We'd had obviously lots of drinks and lots of drugs, and we'd come into the office and we'd have a line of cocaine under our keyboard, and then what we'd do is, as soon as the boss's back would turn, we'd snort a line of cocaine, put the keyboard back into its place, and carry on working. So by virtue of what we was doing, we was constantly on cocaine and drink, and the reason why we kept taking cocaine and drink was because we was always struggling to get over the previous night's exploits and the previous night's drinking and alcohol before.
How many HR professionals do we have in this room? Go look under keyboards. If at some point, email me and I'll tell you which pubs to look for your employees in, which hotels crack cocaine's been stashed into ceilings off. I've been doing this job too long. Unfortunately, people don't turn up looking like that in your HR department. It is quite hard to find out who is using a substance or not. The presentation kind of varies according to the substance and the duration of use. For a lot of people who are very intelligent and quite rich, actually this kind of picture may come well down the line. You will never escape it, right? But it will come. But people can hide it for years and years and years. I mean, I was just telling Paul outside, I have a very senior, very successful banker who have treated a few times. He comes into my unit and he's absolutely fine. 3 hours later, he's off the substances and he's on the floor and he's delirious for 14 days. And it's a substance that holds him together. You take it away and they just decompensate that quickly. But the kind of things you want to be looking at are in terms of mood. Are people's mood quite unstable? Are they quick to anger? Are they irritable? Is there any paranoia? Do they kind of twist everything around and question everything you say or do? Nothing you say is right. With some drugs, you can be quite flat. So where you're expecting people to react to you, you just stay flat. With appearances, it may deteriorate, it may not. The pupils may be pinned or quite dilated. The speech can sadly be normal, it can be fast, it can be slow, or they can have what's called a flight of ideas. They jump from one thought to another thought quite quickly. They might be quite sleepy at work. You may find strange smells at work. That's one. But the second one is if you know anyone who buys shares in Listerine, watch out for alcohol. With work, you're going to notice quality deteriorating, increasing absenteeism, careless mistakes, poor judgment, risk-taking, slow to grasp and understand things. With certain behaviors, again, you're looking for extended lunches, breaks during the day, early departures, avoiding friends and family, not seeking out colleagues at work, and blaming everybody else for their shortcomings. Again, while you're out to look for these individuals, it's also a very lonely time for these individuals because a lot of them are very high functioning and suddenly they see their lives crumbling and they're frantically trying to keep everything together as well. So it is about being supportive. So finally, I'm going to give you some rough pointers on where you can access help. I'll leave it to Matthew to tell you what you actually need to do in terms of obligations. Most employers find it very hard to talk about addictions. If you're in HR, I mean, I work in an addictions treatment company, but my HR struggle, I mean, we treat 20,000 people every day in our treatment system, but my HR struggles to manage substance misuse among employees. So you're not alone. It is a very difficult subject to approach. Most people aren't confident. They don't know what the treatment pathways are. They don't actually know how to help, which makes them quite reluctant to approach this subject in the first place. But essentially, what we do is we provide substance misuse treatment in the City of London. We call Square Mile Health. So what we can do is we offer counseling, there's medication, there's rehab, there's detox. We also offer stop smoking clinics. We've got a stand out there. So my team's out there in the corner. Do you want to put your hands up? So if you want to see them afterwards and make connections, we do a lot of training as well to businesses. It's all free. We're happy to come and help you with any problems you've got. Apart from that, really, we've got Recovery London, which is a day rehab program. We've got Passmore's House, which is a detox and rehab service. It's both for the NHS and for private patients. And essentially, I'm going to end here, and hopefully you're all awake for Matthew.